Okay, today we're going to talk about factoring binomials and then finding zeros when they ask for them. So this first one tells us that using the box method, they want us to factor the expression x squared plus 6x minus 12. So the first thing that we're going to do to be able to factor this is we need to draw our, box, and we need to draw our x. So remember that for our x is going to be the first and last up top. Okay, the middle term goes on bottom. And then in our box, remember the first term goes in the first box, last term goes in the last box. And then we're going to plug in these two boxes with what we find in those two factors. So we're going to go ahead and fill in our first and our last in our box first. So we're going to go ahead and fill in our x squared and our negative 16. Okay, so we're going to fill those in. Now, we're going to go to our x and we're going to multiply our first times our last. So negative 16 times x squared is just negative 16x squared. Okay, and we are going to plug in our middle term, which is 6x. Now, remember that this number up top, the sign of that number tells us if they're going to be the same sign or opposite. So if it's a negative sign, okay, one of our factors is going to be a positive and one's going to be a negative. They're going to be opposite signs. If it was a positive, then they would both be the same. So we have to figure out what numbers are going to multiply to give us 16, but because they're opposite signs, subtract to give us 6. So we're going to go over here and we're going to write our factors. So our factors for 16, we have 1 and 16, we have 2 and 8, and we have 4 and 4. So which of those factors are going to subtract to give you 6? Okay, it's going to be your 2 and your 8. So we know that based off of our number on the bottom, our largest number has to be that sign, which is positive. So the 8 is going to be a positive, and the 2 is going to be your negative. And then they both need to have the x variable. So now that we know that, we're going to go and we're going to plug that into our box. So we're going to plug in an 8x. Doesn't matter in which box you put them in, and your negative 2x. Okay. Now, we're going to fill out the outsides of our box. Now, we know what's the only thing that multiplies to give you x squared? Well, only x and x multiply to give you x squared. Okay, well then 8x times what up here gives you 8x? And 8. And then what down here multiplies to x to give you negative 2x? A negative 2. So our factors would then be x plus 8 and x minus 2. Okay, number 2. So they want us to find the zeros now, okay? So we're going to start off this problem doing the exact same thing. So we're going to factor it first so that we can figure out how we're going to be finding our zeros. So again, we're going to draw our box and our x. Okay, and we're going to go ahead and start plugging in what we know. So we're going to plug our first term, the x squared, in the first box, and we're going to plug the last term, the negative 12, to the last box. Remember, in our x now, we're going to move to our x. The top of our x is our first times our last, so negative 12 times x squared, which is just negative 12x squared. And then the middle term goes on the bottom, which is your 4x. Okay, now, so same thing from last. What does this negative 12 tell you that your signs are going to be? They're going to be opposite. One's going to be a positive, one's going to be a negative. Okay, so we're ultimately going to be subtracting our factors to get this bottom number of 4. So we have to figure out what are our factors. So we need to know the factors of 12. So we have 1 and 12, we have 2 and 6, and we have 3 and 4. So which of those factors are going to subtract to give you 4? Your 2 and your 6. Now which one's going to be positive? Okay, the larger number is going to be positive because of the sign down here is positive. So your 6 is going to be positive and your 2 will be negative because 6 minus 2 is 4. So we're going to go and we're going to plug those in. So we're going to plug a 6x in one box and we're going to plug your negative 2x into your other box. We're going to factor just like we did before. So what's the only thing that can multiply to give you x squared? X and x. So then x times what on top is going to give you 6x, 6. And what on bottom times x is going to give you negative 2, negative 2. So we know that our factors are x plus 6 and x minus 2. Now, what are they asking for? Are they asking for our factors? No, they're asking what are the zeros. Okay, so we have to take our two factors and set them equal to 0. And we're going to solve for x for both of them. So for this first one, for x plus 6, how do we get the x by itself? If it's a plus 6, we want to do the opposite, so we're going to subtract 6 from both sides. So we get x equals negative 6. Then on our second one, we need to get the x by itself. The opposite of a minus 2 is adding 2 to both sides. So we end up getting x equals 2. And those there are your zeros. Number 3. So find the zeros of the equation 3x squared minus 3 equals 0. So we're going to do this the exact same way. Okay, so it's still having us find our 0, so we're going to do the same thing. So we're going to go ahead and we're going to start, and we're going to create our box and our x. Okay, so remember the first term that we have, with the x squared, goes in the first box. The last term, which is the constant, goes in the last box. Okay, so up top of our x, we take our first and our last and we multiply them together. So 3x squared times a negative 3 is just a negative 9x squared. Now, do we have a middle term? No, we don't. Okay, so then what do you think we're gonna put down here for our middle term? 0. Okay, we have 0x left. Now, again, what does this negative 9x tell you? Are both sides going to be the same or are they going to be opposite? They're going to be opposite, so one's going to be a positive and one's going to be a negative. So we need to figure out what two numbers are going to subtract to give me this 0. So I need to go and I need to find my factors. So my factors of 9, I have 1 and 9, and I have 3 and 3. So which two are going to subtract to give you 0? The 3 and 3. So we're going to have positive 3x and a negative 3x. And when I go, we're going to plug those into our box now. Now, we have a leading coefficient now here in this first box. So it's not just x squared anymore, it's a 3x squared. So we're going to first go horizontally. So we're going to use this first row first. Now, between 3 and 3, what factor do they have in common? Well, they both have a 3 because they're both 3's, right? So we're going to bring out a 3, and they both have an x, so we're going to pull out that x. Now that we figured out one side, we can figure out everything else. So 3x times what on top gives you 3x squared? Well, just 1x. And then 3x times what on top gives you 3x? 1. And down here on the bottom, what times 1x is negative 3x? Well, negative 3. So we have our factors. Our factors are 3x minus 3 and 1x plus 1. Now, are we just looking for our factors? No, we're looking for our zeros. So we have to take both of these factors, just like we did before, and we're going to set them equal to 0. And we're going to solve for x. So for this first one, to get x by itself, we are going to get rid of this minus 3 first. So the opposite of minus 3 is plus 3. So we have 3x equals 3. Now I need to get x by itself. 3 is being multiplied to that x, so the opposite of multiplication is division. So I'm going to divide by 3, and we get that x equals 1. Okay, then I'm going to move to my second equation. Again, what's the first thing I want to move here? The plus 1, so to the opposite of plus 1 is going to be subtract 1 from both sides. So I have 1x equals 0, or sorry, 1x equals negative 1. And then I need to divide by that 1, so I get x equals negative 1. And there are your 2 zeros for this problem. Okay. Number 4, this one's a little bit different than what we've done, and I want to go over a problem like this because when you do your activity, there will be a problem like this, and I don't want you to be confused or give up on it because you're not sure. So it tells us that we want to factor the following expression. Now, on the activity that you'll be doing in the next few days, what they do is to make their lives a little bit easier and not have such big numbers, they look first at their whole numbers. And they say, well, do any of them have a certain factor or certain number that's a factor for each one of them? And in this case, yes, because 7 goes into 7. 7 times 6 gives you 42. And then 7 times 63 gives you, 7 times 9 gives you 63. So 7 is a GCF of this whole thing. So what they did is they're going to pull out the 7, and they're going to then divide every number by 7. So 7 divided by 7 is just 1. So you have your x squared. Negative 42, so this number here, divided by your GCF of 7 gives you a negative 6x. And your last number, 63, divided by 7 just gives you a plus 9. So all they did was they just pulled out a GCF. And so what they're going to do is they're just going to factor this here. It makes your life a little bit easier at smaller numbers, right? This doesn't work for every problem. This problem it does because all of these numbers up top have a greatest common factor. Okay, so we're going to now solve with our x in our box. Okay, so now we're using this expression here. Okay, so we're going to fill in our box first. So our first term is x squared, and your last term is 9. Okay, so we're just kind of disregarding this 7 right now. We're not using it. So then we're going to go to our x, and we're going to say, okay, first times last, so 9 times x squared goes on top, so 9x squared. And our middle term, which is negative 6x, goes on bottom. Now, this 9x, that positive 9x tells you, are both signs going to be the same, or are both signs going to be opposite? Or are they going to be opposite signs? Okay, this tells us that they're both going to be the same. So because we're looking at the same, we have to see, well, what is the same? Are they both going to be positive, or are they both going to be negative? To figure that out, you look at this bottom number. Okay, that bottom number, is it positive or negative? It's negative, so both of your signs have to be negative. Now, you're still adding to get to your negative 6, but they're both just going to have to be that negative sign. So we have to go and we have to figure out our factors. So we need to know our factors of 9. So we have 1 and 9, and we have 3 and 3. So which of these numbers add up to give you 6? The 3 and the 3. So we're going to put our 3x and our 3x. So they're both negative. Now we're going to come in our box and we're going to plug in both the negative 3x's. Alright, so the only thing that you can multiply to give you x squared is x and x. So up top, so x times what is negative 3x? Just your number, so negative 3. And then what on bottom times x gives you negative 3x? Just negative 3. So when you write your final answer for your factor, because on this one they're only asking for the factor, you're going to write your GCF. So we said our GCF that they gave us was 7 Then we're going to write our two parentheses, so our two factors. So x minus 3 and x minus 3. Okay. And the last one, they want you to now find the zeros of the equation. So 12x squared plus 14x minus 6. So again, for this one, you can still factor out, and that's how they're going to kind of do this one. They're going to factor out the number, or the greatest common factor between this expression. So if we look at 12, 14, and 6, what number factor do they all have in common? Okay, they all have a 2 in common. Let me write this a little higher. So they all have a 2 in common. Okay, so now we're going to write our new equation. So we're going to remember we take the number and we divide it by our 2. So what's 12 divided by 2? 6. So we have 6x squared. Then we have plus 14x divided by 2, which gives you your plus 7x. And then your minus 6 divided by 2 is just a minus 3. Okay, and all that's still equal to 0. Now, again, we're going to leave this 2 alone like we did before. Okay, and we are going to factor this expression here inside of the parentheses. So we're still going to go and we're going to draw our x and our box. So remember, first term goes in first box, last term goes in last box. Okay, then we're going to come over to our x, and we're going to take our first times our last, so 6x squared times negative 3, which is negative 18x squared. And we're going to take our middle term, which is 7x, and we're going to put it on the bottom. So again, we're looking for our factors. So this negative 18 tells you, are they both going to be the same, or are they going to be opposite? The negative tells you that one's going to be positive and one's going to be negative because they're opposite. So we're going to be subtracting our factors to be able to find this 7x. So to do that, we need to know what our factors are. So our factors of 18 are, we have 1 and 18, 2 and 9, and 3 and 6. Okay, so which of those factors are going to subtract to give you 7? The 2 and the 9. So we have a 2x and a 9x. Now, which one of those is going to be positive? The 7x tells you which number is positive. Well, the 9x is going to be positive, the larger number, because this is a positive on the bottom, and a negative 2x. So 9 minus 2 is 7. Okay, we're good. So we're going to go and we're going to plug it into our box. 9x and negative 2x. Now, we're going to go and we're going to look at our first row first. Okay, between this, because there's a leading coefficient, remember we have to look at that row and see what is the greatest common factor between the 6 and the 9. So if we think about that, the greatest common factor is going to be 3. Okay, and they both have an x, so I have to include the x. So now that we have that one side, we can go ahead and we can figure out every others. So 3x times what gives you 6x squared? Well, 3 times 2 is 6. I have 1x. I need one more. 3x times what is 9x? 3. What times 2x is negative 2x? Just a negative 1. So your factor, if you were writing your factor, is, remember you have to write that 2 first, then your parentheses. So then your 3x minus 1 and 2x minus 3. Now, they want us to find our zeros though. Okay, so in finding your zeros, we're only setting our parentheses equal to 0. So we're just kind of saying this 2, you can go away. Okay. I don't need you to be able to find my zeros. Okay, so we're going to take our 3x minus 1 and set it equal to 0. And we're going to take our 2x minus 3 and set it equal to 0. and we're going to solve. So, with the 3x minus 1, what's the first thing you have to move? The minus 1, so I'm going to add 1 to both sides. So I have 3x equals 1. Okay, and then your last step, I got to get rid of that 3. It's multiplied, so the opposite of multiplication is I have to divide by 3. So I get x equals 1/3. Okay, and then we're going to move to our last one, and we have, what do we have to move first? Good, minus 3, so we're going to add 3 to both sides. So we have 2x equals 3. And what's your last step? Divide by 2. So you get x equals 3/2. Okay, so this is a little bit different in the way that we do it because we haven't really brought out a GCF in this, but we just kind of want to show you what it looks like and how you can do it, and kind of make your numbers smaller, just because there will be an example or two on your upcoming activity.